My fingers moved across the control panels in the sequence I'd practiced 1,000 times, each switch and dial positioned exactly where muscle memory expected to find them. The Odyssey's cramped cockpit hummed with the quiet efficiency of a machine built to withstand pressures that would crush a normal vessel in milliseconds. 20 years of deep-sea operations had taught me to trust the systematic approach. Check every system twice, verify every reading, question everything, until the moment you commit to the dive. Lauren sat at her station to my right, her hands dancing across the sonar calibration controls with the same methodical precision I'd come to rely on during our previous missions together. The soft blue glow of her screens painted her concentrated face in electric light as she fine-tuned the passive array that would serve as our eyes in the absolute darkness below. Her headset crackled with radio chatter from the surface support team, confirming telemetry links and backup communication protocols. Odyssey, this is Hades. Emily Rodriguez's voice cut through the ambient noise with the crisp authority that marked her as military-trained. We're showing green across all boards and ready for descent initiation. I reached for my own communication headset, adjusting the microphone close to my mouth. The Hades hung in the water 200 meters to our starboard side, its larger hull visible through our porthole as a dark silhouette against the lighter blue of surface waters. Emily's submarine represented the latest in military deep-sea technology, equipped with more powerful engines and scanning equipment than our research vessel. But I'd learned to trust the Odyssey's proven reliability over flashy upgrades. Copy that, Hades. Running final systems verification now. Lauren looked up from her console, tapping her screen with one finger. Sonar array is calibrated and responding normally. Passive sensors are picking up marine life at standard depths, nothing unusual. She paused, checking another readout. Communication links with surface control are strong, backup frequencies tested and confirmed. I worked through my own checklist, watching pressure gauges, power distribution displays, and navigation systems. The Odyssey had been my partner for 8 years of deep ocean exploration, and I knew every sound she made, every vibration that indicated normal operation versus potential trouble. Today, everything felt exactly as it should. The steady thrum of life support systems, the gentle hum of electrical circuits, the subtle vibration of the ballast tanks maintaining our current depth. The mission parameters had been burned into my memory during months of preparation, but I reviewed them one more time on my primary display. Serena Deep represented the most remote and unexplored section of the Mariana Trench, a place where no human had ever descended. The geological surveys suggested a depth of nearly 37,000 feet, pushing the absolute limits of what our submersibles could theoretically survive. If we succeeded, we'd break the depth record by over 3,000 feet. More importantly, we'd be racing against Emily's team to be the first humans to touch the bottom of the deepest place on Earth. Surface control, this is Odyssey. I adjusted my radio to the main frequency, requesting permission to begin descent sequence. The response came back immediately through speakers mounted above my head. Odyssey, you are cleared for descent. Weather conditions remain optimal. Sea state calm. Support vessel is maintaining position and monitoring all telemetry feeds. I felt the subtle shift in the Odyssey's orientation as the massive support ship above us released our tethers. The cables that had connected us to the surface during our final preparations now hung free, allowing us complete independence for the journey ahead. Lauren's fingers moved across her control panel, activating our internal navigation systems and switching our communication array to the deep water frequencies that would penetrate the ocean's layers. Hades confirms ready for synchronized descent, Emily's voice announced. Suggest we maintain 200-meter separation and descend at standard rate until we clear the continental shelf. Agreed. Odyssey beginning descent now. I engaged the ballast controls, feeling the familiar sensation of the submarine settling deeper into the water. The pressure readings on my main display began their steady climb as we left the bright surface waters behind. Through the thick glass of our viewport, I watched the color of the ocean change from brilliant blue to deeper azure, then to a darker shade that hinted at the absolute blackness waiting miles below. Lauren monitored our descent rate, calling out depth markers as we passed each 1,000-foot interval. Passing 2,000 feet, hull integrity normal, all systems operating within expected parameters. The cramped confines of our cockpit felt both protective and confining as we descended. Every surface within arm's reach served a specific function. Control panels, emergency equipment, life support monitors, and communication gear packed into a space barely large enough for 2 people. The titanium hull surrounding us represented the only barrier between our fragile human bodies and an environment that would kill us instantly, yet I'd learned to find comfort in the Odyssey's solid construction and proven track record. Emily's voice crackled through our speakers again, her tone carrying the excitement of someone approaching a historic achievement. Hades reporting normal descent. Water temperature dropping as expected, visibility decreasing past standard parameters. I checked our external cameras, watching the last traces of natural light fade into memory. The powerful LED arrays mounted on our hull cut through the darkness like lighthouse beams, illuminating particles and occasional marine life as we continued our controlled fall toward the ocean floor. Our lights could penetrate maybe 60 feet in any direction, creating a small bubble of visibility in an ocean that stretched infinitely in all directions. Passing 5,000 feet, Lauren announced, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were attempting. We're now deeper than most recreational submarines can safely operate. The pressure readings continued their relentless climb, each number representing tons of water pressing against our hull from every angle. I'd run the calculations dozens of times during mission planning, verifying that our submarine's design could theoretically handle the extreme pressures waiting at the bottom of Serena Deep. Theoretically. The difference between mathematical projections and actual survival in the deepest place on Earth would only be proven when we reached our destination. Continental shelf edge approaching, I announced to both Emily and our surface support team. Transitioning from continental slope to true deep ocean environment. Lauren's sonar displays showed the dramatic change in ocean floor topology as we passed over the edge of the continental shelf. Behind us, the relatively shallow waters where most human ocean activity took place. Ahead, an abyss that plunged toward the center of the Earth through distances that challenged human comprehension. Hades confirms visual on shelf transition, Emily reported. Maintaining separation and descent rate. All systems continue normal operation. I glanced at Lauren, who had become completely absorbed in monitoring our sonar array and communication systems. Her concentration reminded me why I'd requested her as co-pilot for this mission. Technical expertise mattered in deep ocean exploration, but the ability to remain calm and focused during extraordinary circumstances mattered even more. Passing 10,000 feet, Lauren called out, checking her instruments. We've now descended deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Hull compression within expected parameters. No indication of structural stress. The Odyssey continued its descent through water that had never known sunlight, past depths where the pressure would crush most surface vessels, like empty aluminum cans. Our artificial lights revealed an alien landscape of particles and occasional deep-sea creatures adapted to survive in conditions that represented the extremes of what life on Earth could endure. Emily's voice cut through the steady background noise of our life support systems. Approaching 15,000 feet. Hades reporting all systems green and continuing descent. Weather conditions on surface remain optimal for extended operation. I monitored our power consumption carefully, knowing that every system on the Odyssey drew from batteries that would have to sustain us through the hours-long journey to the bottom and back to the surface. The mathematics of deep ocean exploration always came down to energy management. Too little power, and we'd be stranded in the abyss. Too much consumption, and we'd run out of life support before completing our mission. Odyssey to surface control, I transmitted. Passing 15,000 feet with normal descent rate and all systems operational. Estimate arrival at target depth in approximately 2 hours. The response from our surface support team carried the tension that everyone involved in the mission felt, even those remaining safely above. Copy, Odyssey. Weather forecast remains stable. Backup support vessels in position. Continue mission as planned. Lauren adjusted her headset, switching between communication frequencies to maintain contact with both the Hades and our surface team. Passive sonar is picking up the usual deep-water marine life. Nothing extraordinary at these depths, just the standard species we'd expect to find. I checked our external temperature readings, watching the numbers drop as we descended into waters that maintained a constant temperature just above freezing. The environment outside our protective hull had become completely hostile to human life. No air, no light, no warmth, and pressure that increased with every foot we traveled deeper. 20,000 feet, Lauren announced. We're now entering the Hadal zone. No human being has ever been this deep. The significance of that statement settled over our cramped cockpit like a physical presence. We'd moved beyond the reach of all previous exploration, descending into a realm that remained as mysterious as the surface of distant planets. Every foot we traveled deeper took us further from the possibility of rescue if something went wrong. Emily's voice carried a note of satisfaction as she reported from the Hades. Crossing 20,000 feet with all systems green. Making history, people. The first humans to explore the deepest places on Earth. I maintained our descent rate while monitoring the increasing pressure readings. The numbers on my display represented forces that no surface dweller could truly comprehend. Millions of pounds pressing against every square inch of our hull, held back only by titanium alloys and engineering calculations that had never been tested at these extreme depths. The depth gauge on my primary display read 35,900 feet when we crossed the threshold that had defined human exploration for decades. I watched the numbers continue climbing, each foot representing territory that no human being had ever witnessed. The external cameras automatically activated their recording sequence, capturing the moment we became the deepest explorers in human history. Lauren's voice cut through the steady hum of our life support systems, her professional composure unable to completely mask her excitement. We've officially passed the previous depth record, 36,000 feet and descending. Emily's voice crackled through our communication array, carrying the satisfaction of someone achieving a lifelong goal. Outstanding work, both crews. The Hades confirms we're making history down here. I glanced through our starboard porthole, catching a glimpse of the Hades' navigation lights, cutting through the absolute darkness, 200 meters away. Emily's submarine maintained perfect formation with our own vessel, both of us following identical descent patterns toward the floor of Serena Deep. The coordination required for two independent vessels to navigate these extreme depths while maintaining safe separation distances demanded constant attention to every detail. The water outside our protective hull had become something alien, a liquid environment that bore no resemblance to the ocean that existed near the surface. Our powerful LED arrays carved narrow channels of visibility through the darkness, illuminating particles and occasional fragments of organic matter that drifted past like snow in a cosmic storm. The beams could penetrate maybe 50 feet in any direction, creating a small bubble of known space in an ocean that stretched infinitely beyond our ability to comprehend. Lauren monitored her sonar displays with focused concentration, tracking the underwater topology, as we descended past geological formations that challenged surface world understanding. Passive sonar is picking up some incredible structures down here. We've got underwater mountain peaks rising from the trench floor, valleys that drop even deeper than our current position. I checked our navigation system, confirming that we remained on course for the deepest point of the trench. The mathematical calculations that had guided our descent looked simple on paper, but executing them in an environment where the slightest miscalculation could result in catastrophic hull failure required absolute precision. Every system on the Odyssey operated within tolerances that had been tested in laboratory conditions, but never proven at these extreme depths. Odyssey to surface control. I transmitted through our communication array, passing 36,200 feet with normal descent rate and all systems operational. Hull integrity remains within expected parameters. The response came back through speakers mounted above our heads, the voice of our surface coordinator carrying professional calm despite the magnitude of what we were attempting. Copy, Odyssey. Weather conditions remain optimal, all support vessels maintaining position. Continue descent as planned. Lauren adjusted her headset, switching between communication frequencies to coordinate with both the Hades and our surface support team. Passive sonar continues showing the most incredible geological features. Rock formations that look like they've been carved by forces we can't even imagine. The external temperature readings showed water that maintained a constant temperature just above freezing, trapped in eternal darkness where seasonal changes meant nothing. The environment outside our titanium hull represented the ultimate frontier of exploration on Earth, a place where the pressure would instantly crush human tissue and the complete absence of light made navigation impossible without artificial systems. 36,500 feet, Lauren announced, checking her depth readings. The Hades is maintaining perfect formation. All communication links strong. I felt the subtle vibrations of our hull responding to the increasing pressure. Tiny adjustments in the metal that reminded me of the tremendous forces pressing against us from every direction. The engineering specifications claimed our submarine could theoretically survive at the bottom of Serena Deep. But the difference between theoretical survival and actual performance would only be proven when we reached our destination. Emily's voice carried notes of excitement as she reported from the Hades. Sonar is picking up what looks like massive canyon systems carved into the trench walls. The geological complexity down here is beyond anything we've seen in previous deep ocean surveys. I checked our external cameras, watching our lights illuminate the alien landscape of the deep ocean. Occasionally, we passed through clouds of particles that created almost snow-like conditions in our beam paths, while other areas remained so clear that our lights seemed to penetrate impossible distances before fading into the infinite blackness. Approaching final 1,000 meters to target depth, I announced to both Emily and our surface team. All systems continue normal operation, descent rate steady and controlled. Lauren leaned closer to her sonar display, her expression shifting from routine monitoring to focused attention. Something in her posture changed, a subtle tension that I'd learned to recognize during our years of working together on deep ocean missions. Her fingers moved across the control panel, adjusting sensitivity settings and switching between different scanning modes. Aaron, I'm picking up something unusual on passive sonar. Her voice carried a note of professional curiosity mixed with confusion. There's a large signature moving slowly near the trench floor, roughly 2 miles below our current position. I glanced at her displays while maintaining our descent controls, noting the distinctive pattern that appeared on her sonar screen. The signature was definitely biological rather than geological, showing the regular movement patterns characteristic of living organisms rather than the static returns of rock formations or metallic debris. Can you get a clearer reading on the size? Lauren's hands moved across her instruments, fine-tuning the passive array to get better resolution on the anomalous contact. It's substantial. The signature suggests something serpentine, maybe several hundred meters in length. But that doesn't match anything in our marine life databases for these depths. She switched her communication headset to include Emily in our discussion. Hades, are you picking up any large biological contacts on your sonar arrays? Emily's response came back immediately, her voice carrying the sharp attention of military training. Negative on biological contacts. Our active sonar sweeps are showing standard geological features and normal small marine life. What exactly are you tracking? Lauren studied her readings, adjusting the display parameters to get the clearest possible image of whatever was moving in the depths below us. Something large and serpentine, moving slowly along what appears to be the trench floor. The signature is biological, but unlike anything in our identification databases. I cut Lauren off mid-sentence, my voice carrying the authority that 8 years of partnership had taught her to recognize. Switch to passive monitoring only. No active pings, no ranging sweeps. Just track whatever you're seeing without sending any signals. Lauren's hands moved to her control panel, but I caught the slight tremor in her fingers as she adjusted the sensitivity settings. She'd worked deep ocean missions long enough to understand the implications of finding something this large at these depths, something that shouldn't exist according to every marine biology database we'd ever studied. The signature is massive, she whispered, leaning closer to her displays. Pattern analysis suggests a serpentine body structure, but the length readings are showing over 300 meters. That's longer than most naval destroyers. I absorbed that information while maintaining our descent rate, calculating the mathematics of what Lauren was describing. An organism that size operating at these depths challenged everything we knew about deep-sea life forms and the biological limits of survival under extreme pressure. My experience told me to approach any unknown entity with extreme caution, especially when that entity appeared capable of movements that defied standard marine life behavior. Emily's voice crackled through our communication array, her military training evident in the crisp confidence of her tone. Hades to Odyssey. We're not picking up your contact on our standard arrays. Recommend we activate our high-powered active sonar suite for positive identification and full documentation. The suggestion hit me like cold water. Active sonar at these depths meant sending powerful acoustic pulses directly toward whatever was moving on the trench floor below us. The kind of aggressive scanning that could be interpreted as a threat by any intelligent organism, marine or otherwise. Negative, Hades. Absolutely negative on active scanning. I adjusted my headset microphone closer to my mouth, wanting to make sure Emily heard every word clearly. We need to maintain passive observation and document this creature from a safe distance. No provocative actions until we understand what we're dealing with. Lauren continued tracking the massive signature on her displays, her voice carrying notes of fascination mixed with growing concern. It's following what looks like a regular patrol pattern along the trench floor. The movement is too systematic to be random foraging behavior. Emily's response came back immediately, carrying the impatience of someone accustomed to taking decisive action rather than waiting for situations to develop naturally. Our mission parameters require full scientific documentation of any biological discoveries. The Hades carries the most advanced active sonar array ever deployed at these depths. We can get complete acoustic imaging and behavioral analysis. I watched Lauren's sonar displays while considering Emily's argument and weighing it against every instinct I'd developed during 2 decades of deep ocean exploration. The creature's systematic movement patterns suggested intelligence levels that went far beyond typical marine life behavior. An intelligent organism might interpret aggressive sonar scanning as hostile action, and at these depths, with no possibility of rapid ascent or evasive maneuvering, provocation could result in consequences none of us were prepared to handle. Emily, listen to me carefully. We're at 36,000 feet in an environment where rescue is impossible and escape routes are limited. This creature is larger than anything in our databases and exhibiting behavioral patterns that suggest higher intelligence. Active sonar scanning could be interpreted as aggressive action. The communication channel remained silent for several seconds while Emily processed my warning. Lauren kept her attention focused on her passive sonar array, tracking the creature's movements while fine-tuning her equipment to get the clearest possible readings without transmitting any detectable signals. "The pattern is definitely systematic," Lauren reported quietly. "It's covering specific sections of the trench floor in what looks like territorial patrol behavior. This isn't random movement or feeding activity." Emily's voice returned with the determined tone that I'd learned to associate with military decision-making protocols. "Understood, Odyssey. However, our mission requires complete documentation of any significant biological discoveries. The Hades active sonar can provide detailed acoustic imaging without extended exposure times." I felt my jaw tighten as Emily continued building her argument for aggressive scanning. The systematic nature of the creature's movements that Lauren was documenting only reinforced my conviction that we needed to maintain our role as passive observers rather than active investigators. "Emily, I'm strongly advising against any active scanning. This organism is exhibiting territorial behavior patterns at depths where no rescue operation could reach us. We document from a distance and maintain passive observation protocols." Lauren glanced at me, her expression reflecting the same concern I felt about Emily's apparent determination to proceed with active sonar, regardless of our objections. The creature below us continued its methodical movement along the trench floor, unaware that 2 human vessels hung in the water column above, debating whether to announce their presence through aggressive acoustic signals. "Hades to Odyssey," Emily announced, her voice carrying the finality of a military commander who had reached a tactical decision. "Preparing to initiate active sonar sweep for biological documentation. Moving into optimal scanning position now." I watched through our starboard porthole as the Hades' navigation lights began shifting position, the larger submarine maneuvering to place itself directly above the creature's projected patrol path. Emily was positioning her vessel for maximum acoustic penetration, exactly the kind of aggressive scanning posture that could provoke an unknown organism into defensive action. "Emily, do not proceed with active scanning. I repeat, do not initiate active sonar." My warnings carried no authority over the Hades crew, and Emily's military background had trained her to prioritize mission objectives over cautious protocols. Lauren's passive sonar continued tracking the massive creature as it maintained its systematic movement pattern, completely unaware that it was about to be subjected to powerful acoustic bombardment from the submarine positioning itself overhead. The Hades completed its maneuvering, hanging in the water column like a predator preparing to strike. Emily's voice came through our speakers one final time before she committed to her course of action. "Hades preparing for active sonar sweep. Full biological documentation commencing in 30 seconds. Emily's voice cut through our communication array with the kind of dangerous confidence that I'd learned to fear during military operations. "Let's see what's really down there." "Emily, no." I grabbed my microphone, my voice carrying every ounce of authority I could muster. "Do not initiate active scanning. Abort the sonar sweep." The active sonar burst erupted from the Hades with tremendous acoustic force, a powerful ping that cut through the water with the intensity of controlled underwater explosions. The sound wave penetrated the ocean depths with enough energy to map geological features across vast distances, exactly the kind of aggressive scanning that I'd spent the last several minutes trying to prevent. Lauren's passive sonar screen immediately exploded into chaotic activity. Her displays, which had been tracking the creature's methodical movement along the trench floor, suddenly showed readings that defied every principle of marine biology she'd studied during her career. The massive serpentine signature that had been moving slowly through the depths, miles below us, reacted to the sonar assault with impossible speed. "It's moving." Lauren's voice cracked with terror as her hands flew across her instrument controls. "The signature is accelerating upward faster than anything should be able to move through water." I leaned over her shoulder, watching her sonar displays register movement patterns that challenged the physical laws governing underwater locomotion. The creature was rushing toward the surface with the speed of a torpedo, but the signature showed a body length that exceeded any man-made vessel ever constructed. My mind struggled to process what we were witnessing as the massive form undulated through the water column with terrifying grace. Our external cameras automatically adjusted their focus and zoom settings, tracking the movement that Lauren's sonar was detecting in the depths below us. Through the darkness beyond our LED arrays, I caught the first glimpse of something vast and dark, rising from the trench floor. The shape appeared at the very edge of our camera range, a shadow within shadows that seemed to absorb our artificial lighting rather than reflect it. Emily's voice came through the comm again, but the dangerous confidence had vanished completely, replaced by the sharp panic of someone confronting a situation beyond their training or experience. "Hades to Odyssey. We're detecting a massive contact approaching our position at incredible speed. Please confirm your sonar readings." The water around both our submarines began to vibrate with a low-frequency sound that penetrated our titanium hulls and resonated through our internal atmosphere. The vibration felt like standing next to enormous machinery, a rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the creature itself rather than any mechanical source. I realized we were hearing the serpent's response to the aggressive sonar ping, a sound that carried implications of intelligence and deliberate communication. Lauren's equipment registered the creature's enormous size as it continued its rapid ascent toward our position. Her voice trembled as she read the measurements displayed on her screens. "The signature is showing over 300 meters in length, and it's accelerating past anything our databases classify as possible for biological entities." Through our communication array, the radio chatter from the Hades crew became increasingly frantic, as their own instruments confirmed what Lauren's sonar was tracking. Emily's commands to her pilot mixed with technical reports from her equipment specialists, creating a cacophony of military terminology that couldn't disguise the fear creeping into their voices. "Emergency ascent! Emergency ascent!" Emily's orders carried through the comm channel as the Hades began attempting evasive maneuvers. "All ballast tanks, maximum rate of ascent." I watched through our viewport as the Hades's lights shifted position, the military submarine trying to gain altitude and distance from whatever was rising to meet them. Their emergency ballast procedures created visible bubbles in the water as they dumped weight and increased buoyancy. But even as I observed their efforts, I knew the mathematics of deep ocean escape made their situation hopeless. The creature's approach registered on every sensor array we possessed, creating a symphony of electronic warnings that filled our cockpit with the sound of instruments detecting something that shouldn't exist. Lauren's hands shook as she tried to maintain tracking on the massive signature, her professional composure finally breaking under the stress of monitoring an entity that challenged everything she'd believed about marine life. "Aaron, it's almost at their depth level." Lauren's scream cut through the ambient noise of our life support systems. "The ascent rate is impossible. Nothing biological can move that fast through water." I gripped our control panel while watching the tactical display that showed both submarines' positions relative to the approaching creature. The Hades had managed to gain maybe 200 feet of altitude during their emergency ascent, but the Serpent was covering vertical distances in seconds that should have taken any known organism several minutes to traverse. Emily's voice crackled through our speakers one final time before her radio discipline completely collapsed. "Mayday. Mayday. Unknown contact approaching at impossible speed, requesting immediate surface support." The low-frequency vibrations intensified around our position, creating harmonic resonances in our hull, that I could feel through the soles of my feet. The creature's response to the aggressive sonar had awakened something ancient and powerful, something that viewed the Hades' acoustic assault as a direct challenge to its authority in these depths. I watched our external cameras track the rising shadow as it approached the Hades' position with deliberate, terrifying purpose. The military submarine's lights flickered as their crew diverted power to their Ascent systems, but their efforts seemed insignificant compared to the massive presence that was emerging from the deepest parts of the ocean to meet them. We were hanging 36,000 feet below the surface, in an environment where rescue was impossible and escape routes were limited to the slow, methodical process of controlled ascent. The creature that Lauren's sonar was tracking had demonstrated movement capabilities that exceeded every known biological entity, and it was responding to Emily's aggressive scanning with what appeared to be deliberate, intelligent action. I realized with cold certainty that we were too deep and moving too slowly to escape whatever was rising to meet the Hades, and that Emily's decision to ignore my warnings had awakened something that had been sleeping in the deepest places of the earth. The creature reached the Hades with the speed of a freight train hitting a concrete wall. I watched through our long-range cameras as the massive serpentine form slammed into Emily's submarine with enough force to send shockwaves through the water that I could feel vibrating through our own hull 30 seconds later. The impact crushed the Hades' forward section like an aluminum can. The titanium plating that had been rated for these extreme pressures folding inward under the creature's assault. Emily's voice cut through our communication array one final time, a scream of absolute terror that carried every note of someone realizing they were about to die in the most horrific way imaginable. The sound lasted maybe 3 seconds before it dissolved into radio static, mixed with the grinding noise of metal being twisted beyond its breaking point. Lauren's hands covered her mouth as she stared at her sonar displays, watching the technical readouts that translated the Hades' destruction into cold electronic data. Her screen showed the submarine's hull integrity failing in real time, pressure readings spiking beyond survivable levels as the creature's massive body began wrapping around the military vessel like a python crushing its prey. The serpent's form coiled around the Hades with deliberate precision, each movement calculated to maximize the pressure applied to the submarine's weakest structural points. Through our cameras, I could see scales that looked like obsidian plates, each one larger than a dinner table, sliding against the Hades' hull with enough force to score the titanium surface. The creature's body appeared to go on forever, segment after segment wrapping around Emily's submarine until the entire vessel disappeared within the serpent's coils. Our external cameras automatically adjusted their focus and zoom settings, trying to track the destruction happening in the darkness beyond our position. The Hades' navigation lights flickered sporadically as the creature's crushing embrace severed power cables and destroyed electrical systems throughout the submarine. Emergency lighting flashed in erratic patterns before failing completely, leaving the dying vessel visible only in the reflected glow from our own LED arrays. Lauren sobbed quietly beside me, her professional composure finally breaking as she listened to the hull breach alarms transmitted from the Hades through our communication equipment. The electronic warnings created a symphony of disaster, each alarm indicating another critical system failure as the creature methodically destroyed every component that had kept Emily's crew alive at these depths. The radio communication from the Hades devolved into a chaos of overlapping emergency broadcasts before cutting to complete silence. No final words, no last-second messages to families on the surface. Just the sudden absence of human voices, replaced by the mechanical sounds of a submarine dying in the deepest parts of the ocean. I gripped our control panel as the implosion reached us, a pressure wave that rattled every piece of equipment in our cockpit and reminded me that we were witnessing destruction from a distance measured in hundreds of feet rather than safe miles. The shockwave caused our own hull to vibrate with harmonics that I could feel through the soles of my feet, tiny tremors that carried the acoustic signature of titanium being compressed beyond its design specifications. Debris from the destroyed Hades drifted past our viewports like grotesque snow, pieces of hull plating and internal components that had once protected human lives now floating as wreckage in the eternal darkness. I watched fragments of Emily's submarine pass through our external lighting, twisted metal that represented the complete failure of human engineering when confronted with forces that exceeded every calculation our species had ever made. The creature slowly uncoiled from the mangled remains of what had been the most advanced deep-sea exploration vessel ever constructed. Its massive body moved through the water with the same geological patience it had displayed throughout the attack, each undulation creating currents that scattered the Hades's debris across a wider area of the trench floor. The serpent's scales caught occasional reflections from our lights, creating brief glimpses of a form so vast that our cameras couldn't capture its full length in a single frame. I reached for our external lighting controls, my hands moving with practiced efficiency, even while my mind struggled to process what I had just witnessed. Our main LED arrays had been illuminating the creature's attack, making us visible to anything with functional vision in these depths. The mathematics of our situation became brutally clear as I calculated our own vulnerability to the same fate that had just destroyed Emily's crew. My fingers found the master switch for our external lighting systems, and I killed every light except our minimal emergency beacons. The brilliant LED arrays that had been carving visibility through the ocean darkness went dark, leaving us in the dim red glow of our internal emergency lighting. The sudden absence of external illumination felt like closing our eyes in a room full of predators, but remaining visible seemed infinitely more dangerous. Lauren's sonar equipment continued tracking the creature's movements as it completed its systematic destruction of the Hades. Her displays showed the serpent moving through the wreckage with methodical precision, examining the results of its attack with what appeared to be satisfied thoroughness. The creature's behavior suggested intelligence that went far beyond simple predatory instincts, a deliberate evaluation of the threat it had just eliminated. The red emergency lighting in our cockpit painted everything in shades of blood and shadow, turning Lauren's tear-streaked face into a mask of terror, illuminated by the glow from her instrument panels. Our life support systems maintained their steady mechanical breathing, the only sounds in our cockpit, now that the Hades's radio transmissions had gone silent forever. I watched our passive sonar displays track the creature's enormous signature as it moved through the debris field with the casual thoroughness of someone cleaning up after completing necessary work. The serpent's massive head rotated in our direction, and I felt my blood turn to ice water as I realized that the ancient intelligence that had just destroyed our sister vessel was now focusing its attention on our position. The creature's head continued turning toward the Odyssey with deliberate, terrifying purpose, and I understood with absolute certainty that our fate now hung in the balance of whatever judgment this ancient guardian was preparing to make about our worthiness to survive this encounter. I pressed my back against the pilot seat as the creature moved toward our position with the same methodical purpose it had displayed while destroying the Hades. The massive head appeared first at the edge of our viewport, emerging from the absolute darkness beyond our minimal emergency lighting like a mountain being born from the ocean floor. My hands gripped the armrests of my chair, knuckles white against the metal, as the serpent continued its approach with movements that seemed to operate on geological timescales rather than any biological rhythm I'd ever witnessed. The head kept coming, growing larger in our field of vision until I realized the scope of what we were seeing. This wasn't just a large marine animal approaching our submarine. The creature's skull alone appeared to dwarf our entire vessel, a structure so massive that our cockpit represented nothing more than a tiny window into an intelligence that predated human existence by millions of years. Lauren had gone completely silent beside me, her ragged breathing from moments ago replaced by absolute stillness. I could see her in my peripheral vision, hands pressed tightly against her mouth, her entire body frozen in the kind of terror that comes from confronting something so far beyond normal experience that the mind struggles to process its reality. Her sonar equipment continued registering the creature's massive signature, but the displays had become irrelevant when the actual entity was filling our viewport with its overwhelming presence. The serpent's eye came into alignment with our position, and every thought I'd ever had about deep-sea exploration evaporated in an instant. The eye itself measured larger than our entire cockpit, a swirling nebula of blue and gold light that pulsed with its own internal illumination. Bioluminescent patterns moved across its surface like aurora displays in the deepest parts of space, creating hypnotic spirals of color that seemed to contain depths within depths. I stared into that impossible eye and felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of consciousness itself. The creature wasn't simply looking at our submarine through the titanium hull and reinforced viewports. Its attention penetrated through every barrier we'd constructed between ourselves and the ocean, reaching directly into my mind with a presence so ancient and vast that my human thoughts felt like whispers in a cathedral. The pressure building in my skull had nothing to do with the water surrounding us at 36,000 feet below the surface. This was something far more profound, an immense intelligence pressing against the boundaries of my consciousness and examining everything I was with the casual thoroughness of someone reading a book. I could feel the creature's attention moving through my memories, my motivations, my understanding of why we had descended to these depths. Lauren whispered something beside me, words in a language I'd never heard her speak before, syllables that sounded like prayers offered to forces beyond human comprehension. Her voice carried the desperate quality of someone calling out to anything that might protect us from an encounter that exceeded every boundary of normal reality. I didn't dare move. Every muscle in my body remained locked in position as I stared into the creature's eye, afraid that any motion might be interpreted as aggression or challenge. The eye blinked with a movement so slow and deliberate that I counted 15 seconds from the beginning of the motion to its completion. The bioluminescent patterns shifted during the blink, creating new configurations of light that seemed to carry meaning I couldn't understand, but somehow felt in the deepest parts of my consciousness. When the eye reopened, the aurora patterns had changed to different colors, deeper blues mixed with silver threads that moved like liquid mercury across the creature's vision. Time felt suspended in our cockpit, as if the normal flow of seconds and minutes had been replaced by something operating on scales that measured change in centuries rather than heartbeats. The creature studied us with the patience of something that had watched continents drift across the ocean floor, that had witnessed the rise and fall of entire geological epochs, while maintaining its vigil in the deepest trenches of the earth. The serpent's gaze continued penetrating through our hull and into my soul, and I understood with absolute clarity that this entity had existed when the planet itself was young. I could sense the vast scope of its experience, the countless ages it had spent in the darkness of the deep ocean, maintaining some cosmic balance that human science had never even suspected existed. The creature's presence filled the water around our submarine with an intelligence so otherworldly that I felt like a microorganism being examined under the lens of a microscope, operated by a consciousness that transcended every category of life I'd ever studied. The pressure in my mind intensified as the ancient being continued its evaluation, weighing our intentions and our worthiness to survive this encounter in the deepest places of the earth. The pressure in my skull reached a breaking point, and suddenly I wasn't sitting in the Odyssey's cockpit anymore. Visions flooded my consciousness like water bursting through a cracked dam. I saw oceans that existed before continents had formed their current shapes. Vast blue expanses under alien skies where the sun appeared smaller and dimmer than anything I'd ever known. The water moved with different rhythms then, currents guided by forces that predated every law of physics humans had discovered. I witnessed the birth of the deep trenches, watching through the creature's ancient memory as tectonic plates shifted and groaned, carving the first scars into the ocean floor that would become the deepest places on Earth. The visions moved through geological time like pages turning in a cosmic book, each epoch lasting millions of years but compressed into seconds of overwhelming sensory experience. The creature's consciousness pressed deeper into mine, and I understood without words or explanations that this being had been present for all of it. Not just present, but actively maintaining something essential to the planet's balance. The serpent was a guardian, a warden that had taken its post in the deepest trenches when life itself was still finding its first tentative foothold in the primordial seas. I saw other guardians too, massive forms sleeping in oceanic depths around the globe. Creatures so ancient that their existence predated the fossil record, beings that had watched the rise and fall of entire evolutionary cycles while maintaining their eternal vigil in places no human had ever imagined reaching. They were connected across vast distances, part of a network that preserved something fundamental about the ocean's deepest mysteries. The visions shifted, and I experienced the creature's perspective during our descent. It had sensed our approach from miles away, felt the displacement of water as our submarines dropped through the various thermal layers toward its domain. Our passive sonar pings had registered as curious whispers, the electronic equivalent of respectful observation from visitors who understood they were entering sacred space. But the Hades's aggressive sonar burst had been different. Through the creature's memory, I felt the acoustic assault like a physical blow, a violent intrusion that shattered the ancient silence it had protected for countless millennia. The active sonar represented everything wrong with human arrogance, the assumption that we could penetrate any mystery through force rather than patience. The creature's anger about Emily's decision burned through my consciousness like acid. I felt its profound disappointment in our species, the way it viewed the Hades's sonar attack as confirmation that humans were destructive children, playing with forces we couldn't comprehend. The serpent had been sleeping peacefully when our acoustic weapons woke it, with what amounted to a declaration of war against the sacred quiet of the deep ocean. I understood now why the Hades had been destroyed with such methodical thoroughness. The creature hadn't acted from simple predatory instinct. It had made a conscious decision to eliminate what it perceived as a threat to the ancient order it had sworn to protect. Emily's crew had died because their aggressive scanning violated principles that existed long before human civilization had even begun. Lauren remained frozen beside me, her breathing so shallow I could barely detect the movement of her chest. Somehow, she understood that our lives hung in the balance of whatever decision this ancient being was preparing to make. One wrong movement, one sound that might be interpreted as aggression or disrespect, could trigger the same crushing fate that had claimed Emily's submarine. Minutes passed like hours as the judgment continued. I felt the creature's attention moving through every memory I possessed about deep-sea exploration, evaluating my motivations for descending to these depths. It examined my respect for the ocean's mysteries, my understanding that some places demanded humility rather than conquest. The ancient intelligence seemed particularly focused on my warnings to Emily, the way I'd tried to prevent the aggressive scanning that had ultimately triggered this catastrophic encounter. The serpent's consciousness pressed against mine, and I sensed something shifting in its evaluation. The crushing weight of cosmic disapproval that had been building in my skull began to ease slightly, replaced by something that might have been grudging acceptance. The creature had reached some unfathomable decision about our worthiness, and we had apparently passed whatever test it had been conducting. I felt the ancient intelligence beginning to withdraw from my consciousness, pulling back from the intimate examination of my thoughts and memories. The visions of primordial oceans faded, leaving only fragments of impossible knowledge about the true age and purpose of the Guardian network. The pressure in my skull diminished to a manageable level, though I knew with absolute certainty that I would never be the same person who had descended into these depths just hours ago. The creature's presence left behind a profound sense of being marked or changed by the encounter. Something fundamental in my understanding of consciousness itself had been altered by the direct contact with an intelligence so vast and ancient that human language contained no words capable of describing it. I had been touched by forces that operated on geological timescales, examined and judged by a being that remembered the formation of the ocean basins themselves. As the psychic connection faded to whispers in the back of my mind, I realized that we had been granted something unprecedented in human history. Not just survival, but acceptance from a guardian that had protected the deep ocean secrets since before our species existed. We had been judged worthy to carry knowledge of its existence back to a world that would never believe what we had experienced in the deepest places of the earth. The ancient intelligence completed its withdrawal from my consciousness, and the creature's massive eye began to close with the same deliberate precision it had displayed throughout our encounter. The movement took nearly 20 seconds, each fraction of the closure carrying weight that seemed to compress entire lifetimes of experience into a single gesture. I understood without words that this represented a final acknowledgement, the serpent's decision rendered through cosmic judgment that operated beyond any human framework of mercy or condemnation. The eye sealed shut, and the bioluminescent aurora patterns that had been swirling across its surface dimmed to faint traces of residual light. Those last threads of blue and gold flickered like dying embers before disappearing completely, leaving only the massive dark curve of the creature's skull filling our viewport. The transition from active intelligence to apparent dormancy felt like watching a star go out, the sudden absence of that overwhelming presence creating a vacuum in my consciousness that I struggled to process. The serpent's colossal body began to uncoil from around the mangled wreckage of the Hades, each movement flowing with the geological patience it had maintained since first rising from the trench floor. I watched through our limited emergency lighting as section after section of obsidian scales slid past our cameras, the creature's form seeming to stretch endlessly as it extracted itself from the debris field. The process unfolded like watching a mountain slowly reshape itself, each undulation of the massive body creating currents that scattered fragments of Emily's submarine across wider areas of the ocean floor. The serpent's withdrawal revealed the full scope of destruction it had inflicted on the Hades. Twisted pieces of titanium hull drifted through our external lighting like metallic snow. Sections of what had been the most advanced deep-sea exploration vessel ever constructed, reduced to scrap metal, floating in eternal darkness. I caught glimpses of larger components, pieces of the navigation array and communication equipment that had connected Emily's crew to the surface world just minutes ago, now serving as monuments to human arrogance in the deepest places of the earth. Lauren's sonar equipment continued tracking the creature's movements, her passive array registering the massive signature as it began descending away from our position. The displays showed the serpent's form, elongating vertically as it dropped toward depths that exceeded our instrument's maximum range capabilities. I watched the sonar readings stretch and fade, the creature's biological signature becoming fainter with each passing second as it returned to whatever primordial domain it had emerged from to deal with our intrusion. The ancient being moved deeper into the trench with purpose that suggested its evaluation of our worthiness was complete. Its descent followed trajectories that seemed to bypass normal physics, the creature navigating underwater geography with intimate knowledge accumulated over geological ages. Lauren's equipment registered the signature dropping past our maximum sensor range within minutes, the serpent disappearing into abyssal depths, where human technology could no longer follow its progress. Water around the Odyssey gradually stilled as the creature's massive form withdrew beyond detection range. The currents generated by its movement during the encounter slowly dissipated, leaving our submarine suspended in the kind of absolute stillness that existed only in the deepest parts of the ocean. Emergency lighting from our hull illuminated particles and debris floating past our viewports. But the cosmic presence that had dominated our environment for the past hour was gone, dissolved back into the darkness as if it had never existed. I sat motionless in the pilot seat, my hands still gripping the control panel armrests, trying to process the reality that we had survived an encounter that should have resulted in our immediate destruction. The creature had possessed the power to crush our submarine as easily as it had destroyed the Hades, yet we remained intact and functional while drifting among the wreckage of Emily's vessel. The mathematics of our survival made no sense according to any framework of marine biology or predatory behavior I'd studied during 20 years of deep ocean exploration. My voice returned slowly, the first sounds I'd made since the creature's massive eye had appeared at our viewport. The words came out as whispers initially, my vocal cords struggling to function after the prolonged silence imposed by cosmic forces pressing against my consciousness. I tested basic communication protocols, calling out Lauren's name to ensure our internal communication systems remained operational after whatever electromagnetic effects the creature's presence might have generated. Lauren remained completely motionless beside me, her body frozen in the same position she'd maintained throughout the creature's evaluation. Tears streamed down her face in steady flows that caught occasional reflections from our emergency lighting, but her eyes remained fixed on the viewport where the serpent's massive form had filled our field of vision. Her breathing came in shallow, rapid cycles that suggested her nervous system was struggling to process the impossible encounter we'd just experienced. I reached across the cockpit to check Lauren's vital signs through the basic medical monitoring equipment built into our life support systems. Her pulse registered elevated but stable, blood pressure higher than normal but within acceptable ranges for extreme stress situations. The readings confirmed she was physically unharmed, but her complete lack of response to my voice or touch indicated psychological trauma that exceeded anything our emergency training had prepared us to handle. The reality of our situation began penetrating the shock that had numbed my thinking processes since the creature first appeared. We were floating at 36,000 feet below the surface, surrounded by the debris of a destroyed submarine, with enough battery power to sustain basic life support for perhaps 8 hours before critical systems began failing. Emergency ascent protocols represented our only chance of survival, but initiating the procedures required me to function despite the cosmic knowledge the creature had implanted in my consciousness. I forced my hands to move across the control panel, fingers finding familiar switches and displays that had guided me through thousands of hours of deep ocean operations. The mechanical actions of checking ballast controls and power distribution helped ground my thinking in practical realities rather than the overwhelming metaphysical implications of our encounter. Emergency ascent procedures demanded methodical attention to detail that left little room for contemplating the ancient intelligence that had judged our worthiness to survive. Ballast tanks responded normally to my commands, dumping weight and increasing our buoyancy according to standard protocols for emergency surface return. The Odyssey began rising through the water column with controlled acceleration. Our ascent rate carefully managed to prevent decompression damage to critical systems. External cameras showed the debris field from the Hades falling away below us as we climbed toward thermal layers, thousands of feet above our current position. Lauren's sonar displays registered our ascent trajectory, but she remained catatonic, staring at the viewport where the creature's eye had been visible just minutes earlier. Her fingers remained pressed against her mouth, tears continuing to flow down her cheeks as her mind struggled to integrate experiences that challenged every principle of reality she'd accepted throughout her professional career. The encounter had broken something fundamental in her understanding of what was possible in the natural world. Our emergency beacon activated automatically as we passed predetermined depth markers, transmitting distress signals toward surface support vessels that had been monitoring our descent since early morning. The signals would take several minutes to reach monitoring stations, but the beacon represented our first connection to the human world we'd left behind when descending into the cosmic mysteries of the deepest ocean trenches. The hours-long journey to the surface stretched ahead of us like an eternity measured in battery levels and life support calculations. Neither of us dared speak about what we'd witnessed in the depths, the terrible knowledge we carried, creating a silence that felt heavier than the millions of tons of water surrounding our tiny submarine. We rose through the darkness, carrying secrets that would forever separate us from a world that could never comprehend the ancient intelligences sleeping in the deepest places of the Earth. The Odyssey's hull broke through the surface tension with a sensation I'd almost forgotten existed after 18 hours of controlled ascent. Water cascaded off our titanium exterior as we emerged into a world that felt alien after the cosmic depths we'd just escaped. My hands moved across familiar controls, but everything felt different now, changed by the knowledge burning in my consciousness like a radioactive wound. Spotlights blazed across our hull from multiple directions as rescue vessels converged on our position. The intensity of artificial illumination seemed harsh and aggressive compared to the subtle bioluminescent patterns that had swirled through the creature's eye during our encounter. Radio chatter filled our communication array with coordinated rescue protocols, human voices discussing recovery procedures with efficient military precision. Lauren sat beside me in the same catatonic position she'd maintained throughout our ascent, her eyes still fixed on the viewport where darkness had been replaced by the organized chaos of surface operations. Her breathing remained shallow and rapid, a rhythm that hadn't changed since the ancient intelligence had withdrawn from our vicinity. A Navy rescue swimmer appeared at our viewport, his wetsuit and breathing apparatus looking primitive compared to the technology that had carried us into the deepest trenches of the Earth. He signaled standard emergency protocols through the reinforced glass, gestures I'd seen dozens of times during training exercises, but never under circumstances that involved cosmic knowledge and ancient guardians sleeping in abyssal depths. The recovery process unfolded with practiced efficiency that felt surreal after our supernatural encounter. Crane operators positioned lifting cables around our hull, while divers secured attachment points designed to handle the Odyssey's weight during surface transfer. The mechanical precision of human engineering seemed laughably inadequate compared to the geological forces I'd witnessed in the creature's movements. They hauled us aboard the primary support vessel within 30 minutes, the Odyssey's hull settling onto deck cradles with metallic clangs that echoed across the ship's superstructure. Medical personnel moved with urgent purpose, preparing to extract us from our submarine through procedures developed for deep-sea emergency situations. None of them understood they were dealing with survivors of an encounter that challenged every principle of marine biology and consciousness research. Navy personnel helped me climb out of the Odyssey's access hatch, my legs wobbling as they adjusted to solid surfaces after 18 hours of controlled ascent. The medical team immediately surrounded us with equipment designed to assess physiological trauma, taking vital signs and conducting preliminary examinations, while I tried to process being back in the human world. Lauren required assistance to leave the submarine, her motor functions compromised by psychological shock that exceeded anything our emergency training had covered. The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and electronics, sterile environments designed to treat conventional injuries rather than cosmic revelations. They strapped us to examination tables while doctors conducted standard protocols for deep-sea exposure, checking for decompression symptoms and pressure-related injuries. I attempted to explain that our trauma wasn't physical, that we'd encountered something that existed beyond normal categories of marine life. But medical personnel interpreted my statements as evidence of psychological distress. A Navy commander entered the medical bay with the bearing of someone accustomed to managing classified situations. His uniform displayed enough ribbons and insignia to indicate extensive experience with deep-sea operations, but his expression suggested skepticism about anything that deviated from standard mission parameters. He introduced himself with rank and title, while medical personnel continued their examinations, establishing authority that would govern our debriefing process. I launched into detailed descriptions of our encounter the moment he requested our mission report. My words tumbled out in rushes as I tried to convey the creature's impossible size, the ancient intelligence that had penetrated my consciousness, and the cosmic judgment that had determined our worthiness to survive. I described the serpent's obsidian scales, each larger than dinner tables, and the bioluminescent aurora patterns that had swirled through its massive eye during our telepathic connection. The commander listened with professional attention while taking notes on a military-issue tablet, but his expression grew increasingly skeptical as my account progressed beyond conventional marine biology. When I described the creature's psychic abilities and the visions it had shared about primordial oceans, his note-taking slowed to occasional marks that suggested he was documenting symptoms rather than testimony about genuine discoveries. Lauren corroborated every detail of my account when medical personnel managed to coax responses from her catatonic state. Her voice came out in whispers as she described tracking the massive sonar signature, its impossible speed during ascent, and the systematic nature of its movements along the trench floor. She provided technical details about passive sonar readings and biological patterns that should have validated our encounter through electronic documentation. Medical personnel exchanged glances that carried implications I recognized immediately. They were interpreting Lauren's testimony as evidence of shared psychological breakdown rather than independent confirmation of our experience. The concept of folie à deux appeared in their whispered consultations, professional discussions about how extreme stress could create identical hallucinations in multiple subjects exposed to the same traumatic environment. A Navy psychiatrist joined our debriefing session, introducing questions designed to assess our psychological stability rather than document our encounter with an ancient intelligence. He asked about previous experiences with deep-sea exploration, our relationship as working partners, and whether we'd discussed the possibility of encountering unknown marine life during our descent. His inquiries followed established protocols for evaluating testimony from personnel who'd survived extraordinary circumstances. I insisted that our encounter was documented in the Odyssey's data logs, that sonar readings and external camera footage would prove everything we described about the creature's behavior. The commander assured me that technical personnel were analyzing all recorded data, but his tone suggested they expected to find evidence of equipment malfunction rather than confirmation of our supernatural experience. Hours passed as military officials conducted systematic debriefings that felt designed to discredit our testimony through repetition and skeptical questioning. They asked the same questions multiple times, looking for inconsistencies in our accounts that might indicate psychological fabrication rather than genuine observation. Each retelling of our encounter was met with professional courtesy that barely concealed their conviction that extreme pressure and trauma had created shared delusions. A senior Navy official arrived with documentation that would formalize their conclusions about the Hades's destruction. He explained with military precision that geological analysis indicated catastrophic hull failure caused by unforeseen pressure variations in the Serena Deep region. The explanation attributed Emily's submarine's destruction to mechanical failure rather than external forces, creating an official narrative that eliminated any mention of unknown marine life. I protested vehemently, pointing out the complete absence of seismic activity in the area during our mission time frame. My arguments about the creature's deliberate attack patterns and the coordinated nature of the Hades's destruction fell on ears that had already decided our testimony was unreliable. They presented geological data that supposedly explained pressure variations capable of crushing titanium hulls, mathematical models that replaced cosmic intelligence with conventional physics. Technical personnel entered the medical bay carrying storage devices that contained every piece of electronic data recorded during our mission. They explained with bureaucratic efficiency that all mission logs, sonar readings, and camera footage required confiscation under national security protocols. The classification level they cited suggested our encounter had triggered procedures designed to control information that might damage government programs or public confidence. Lauren tried to object when they seized her sonar analysis files, her professional pride finally overcoming the psychological trauma that had rendered her nearly mute for hours. She explained the technical significance of the readings we'd obtained, insisting that the scientific community needed access to data about biological signatures operating at those depths. Her protests were dismissed with the same polite firmness they'd used to discredit our encounter testimony. Legal personnel appeared with non-disclosure agreements that covered every aspect of our experience, documents written in language designed to prevent any discussion of our encounter with unauthorized personnel. The agreements included specific clauses about psychological counseling and ongoing medical evaluation, suggesting they expected continued attempts to publicize testimony they'd already classified as unreliable. I read through the legal documentation with growing fury, understanding that they were systematically burying evidence of the most significant discovery in human history. The ancient intelligence we'd encountered represented proof that consciousness operated on scales beyond anything science had imagined, but military bureaucracy was reducing our experience to equipment failure and trauma-induced hallucinations. My objections grew louder and more desperate as I realized the implications of their cover-up. The scientific community needed to know about the guardian creatures, the network of ancient intelligences that had maintained cosmic balance since before human civilization existed. I described the creature's telepathic abilities and the geological memories it had shared, insisting that such knowledge could revolutionize understanding of consciousness and planetary evolution. The commander's patience finally reached its limits as my protests became increasingly frantic. He explained with cold military authority that unsubstantiated claims about unknown marine life would damage the deep-sea exploration program and undermine public confidence in naval operations. My testimony was officially classified as stress-related psychological symptoms rather than reliable observation of actual events. They transported us back to port while medical personnel continued monitoring our vital signs and psychological responses. I stared through the transport vessel's portholes at an ocean that looked exactly the same as it had before our descent. Water that concealed cosmic mysteries our society was too fragmented to acknowledge. The creature's ancient wisdom burned in my consciousness like acid, knowledge that would remain as deeply buried as the intelligence that had judged us worthy of survival. As military vehicles carried us toward debriefing facilities that would complete our official silencing, I understood with crystalline clarity that the truth of our encounter would remain buried as deeply as the creature itself. I traced the outline of the creature's eye for the 1,000th time, my pencil following the same curved lines I'd been drawing obsessively for 2 years. The sketch covered most of my desk now, layered over depth charts and sonar printouts that documented every anomaly I'd managed to collect since returning from Serena Deep. My hand moved automatically across the paper, recreating those bioluminescent patterns that had burned themselves into my memory like cosmic scars. The research station felt more like a bunker than a laboratory, perched on coastal cliffs where Pacific winds rattled the reinforced windows. I'd chosen this location specifically for its isolation, far enough from civilization that no government officials would accidentally stumble across my work. The rent ate through my savings each month, but privacy was worth more than financial security when you carried knowledge that could reshape human understanding of consciousness and planetary evolution. My academic career had died 18 months ago in a conference room at the university. Department heads sat around polished tables while I presented sonar data and mathematical models, proving our encounter with an intelligence that predated human civilization. They listened with expressions that shifted from professional interest to concerned skepticism as I described the creature's psychic abilities and the cosmic judgment it had rendered on our worthiness to survive. The termination letter arrived 2 weeks later, citing concerns about my psychological stability and inability to maintain professional standards expected of faculty members. 23 years of deep-sea research ended with a form letter that recommended counseling and suggested I take time to recover from traumatic experiences. They stripped my tenure and confiscated my research materials under administrative review procedures that guaranteed I'd never see them again. Lauren's breakdown had been more complete than mine. She'd lasted 6 months after our return, trying to resume normal life while carrying memories of ancient intelligence pressing against her consciousness. I visited her regularly at the private facility, where she spent most days staring at blank walls, occasionally whispering numbers that corresponded to depth measurements from our descent. The doctors assured me her condition was stable, but stability meant she'd never function in normal society again. My computer screens glowed with live feeds from deep ocean monitoring stations scattered across the Pacific Basin. I'd spent months establishing connections with research facilities, claiming academic interest in seismic activity while actually searching for sonar signatures that matched what we'd encountered. The feeds ran constantly, displaying depth readings and acoustic data from locations where similar anomalies had been reported and subsequently classified under national security protocols. The walls around my workstation were covered with depth charts marking every ocean trench where governments had deployed unexplained resources during the past decade. Red pins indicated locations where deep-sea exploration projects had been suddenly terminated without public explanation. Yellow markers showed areas where seismic monitoring equipment had detected acoustic signatures that didn't match known geological activity. Blue pins marked sites where fishing vessels had reported equipment malfunctions and navigation system failures in specific depth ranges. My theory had crystallized over months of obsessive analysis. The creature wasn't an isolated phenomenon, but part of a global network of guardians maintaining cosmic balance in the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. Each major trench system likely housed similar entities, ancient intelligences that had taken their posts when life was still finding its foothold in primordial seas. They operated as a connected consciousness, sharing information across vast distances through means that human science couldn't comprehend. The question that haunted my sleep was why we'd been judged worthy of survival when Emily's crew had been condemned to death. I'd analyzed our behavior during the descent thousands of times, searching for differences that might explain the creature's decision. Our passive observation approach versus the Hades's aggressive scanning seemed like the obvious distinction, but the implications went deeper than simple protocol violations. The creature had evaluated our fundamental nature, examining our motivations for descending to those depths and our respect for oceanic mysteries. Emily's military background had prioritized documentation and conquest over humility, treating the deep ocean like territory to be mapped and controlled rather than sacred space requiring reverence. Her active sonar had represented human arrogance, the assumption that any mystery could be penetrated through force rather than patience. A proximity alarm chimed from my monitoring station, indicating acoustic activity in the Mariana Trench region. I rolled my chair across the cramped workspace, checking displays that showed sonar readings from automated buoys positioned throughout the area. The signature appeared briefly on passive sensors before disappearing into background noise, but the pattern matched biological movement rather than geological activity. These brief contacts had been increasing in frequency over the past 6 months, subtle indications that something vast was stirring in the deepest trenches around the Pacific Rim. Official reports dismissed such readings as equipment malfunctions or whale migration patterns, but I recognized the systematic nature of the acoustic signatures. The Guardians were becoming more active, possibly responding to increased human exploration of deep ocean environments. My retained data files contained everything I'd managed to download before military personnel confiscated our mission logs. The classified information included Lauren's complete sonar analysis, external camera footage from our encounter, and detailed readings of the creature's biological signatures during its approach. I'd hidden backup drives in multiple locations, ensuring the evidence would survive, even if they discovered my research station. The footage remained the most compelling proof of our encounter. External cameras had captured the creature's massive form rising from the trench floor, its impossible speed during ascent, and the methodical destruction of the Hades. The video quality wasn't perfect due to distance and lighting conditions, but the recordings clearly showed something far larger than any known marine life operating at depths where conventional biology claimed nothing could survive. Every attempt I'd made to publish our findings had been blocked through legal pressure and academic blacklisting. Scientific journals refused to consider papers that contradicted established marine biology, especially when the evidence had been classified under national security protocols. My colleagues treated me like a cautionary tale about psychological breakdown under extreme stress. Professional discussions conducted in whispers about the dangers of prolonged deep ocean exposure. The creature's consciousness had left permanent changes in my mind, subtle alterations that became more apparent with time. I could sense pressure variations in ways that had nothing to do with barometric readings, feeling the weight of water in distant ocean trenches like phantom limbs. Sometimes I woke from dreams filled with bioluminescent patterns that carried meaning I couldn't translate, but somehow understood at levels deeper than language. Ocean currents spoke to me now in ways they never had before. Standing on the cliffs outside my research station, I could feel the movement of deep thermal layers thousands of miles away. The creature's telepathic contact had opened channels in my consciousness that remained active, creating connections to oceanic forces that human science had never suspected existed. My monitoring equipment registered another acoustic signature, this time from the Puerto Rico Trench in the Atlantic Basin. The pattern lasted only seconds before fading into background noise, but the frequency matched readings I'd collected from similar events in Pacific waters. The global network was stirring, responding to something that exceeded my ability to detect through conventional sensors. The desk lamp cast harsh shadows across my sketches as I compared new sonar data with patterns from our original encounter. Every acoustic signature followed similar mathematical progressions, biological rhythms that operated on geological timescales rather than anything matching known marine life. The creatures moved through their domains with purpose that suggested coordination across oceanic distances, maintaining some cosmic balance that human civilization had unknowingly threatened. I'd calculated the approximate positions of potential Guardian sites based on trench topology and historical reports of unexplained phenomena. The mathematics suggested at least 12 major entities distributed throughout Earth's deepest waters, each one responsible for protecting specific regions from human interference. Their territories corresponded with areas where deep-sea exploration projects had encountered inexplicable equipment failures and navigation system malfunctions. The computer screens flickered as another monitoring station went offline, the third outage this week in the Tonga Trench region. Official explanations blamed technical malfunctions and harsh deep ocean conditions, but the pattern of failures suggested deliberate interference with human surveillance equipment. The Guardians were eliminating our ability to observe their activities, systematically destroying monitoring devices that penetrated too deeply into their domains. My research had identified dozens of similar incidents over the past 2 years, a gradual escalation in activity that indicated something significant was approaching. Deep-sea mining operations had been experiencing increasing equipment failures as they pushed into previously unexplored regions. Military submarine patrols reported navigation anomalies and sonar malfunctions in specific depth ranges that corresponded with my Guardian location calculations. The cosmic knowledge burning in my consciousness suggested we were approaching some kind of threshold, a point where human expansion into the deep ocean would trigger responses that our species wasn't prepared to handle. The creature that had judged us at Serena Deep was part of a network that had maintained patience for millions of years, but that patience was approaching its limits. I opened another data file containing acoustic signatures from the past month, searching for patterns that might indicate coordinated activity between Guardian sites. The mathematical relationships were subtle but consistent, suggesting communication methods that operated below the threshold of human detection. These ancient intelligences were sharing information about increasing human encroachment into their protected territories. My hands shook slightly as I traced new connections between acoustic events and human exploration activities. Every major deep-sea project that had ventured beyond traditional depth limits had triggered responses from the Guardian network. The creatures were monitoring our technological development, evaluating whether humanity posed an escalating threat to whatever cosmic balance they'd sworn to protect. The implications terrified me more than our original encounter. We'd been judged worthy of survival as individuals, but our species as a whole might face very different evaluation criteria. The Guardians possessed the power to eliminate human deep-sea capabilities entirely, crushing our submarines and destroying our monitoring equipment whenever we pushed too far into their domains. Another alarm chimed from my monitoring station, indicating multiple acoustic events occurring simultaneously across the Pacific Basin. I watched displays show brief signatures from the Japan Trench, the Peru-Chile Trench, and the Aleutian System, coordinated activity that suggested network-wide communication about something requiring immediate attention. The activity patterns were escalating beyond anything I'd recorded since beginning my research. Whatever had awakened the Guardians was approaching some kind of critical threshold, possibly related to human exploration projects that had unknowingly crossed boundaries these ancient entities considered sacred. My calculations suggested we had months, perhaps weeks, before their patience reached breaking points that would trigger responses capable of eliminating human presence in the deep ocean entirely. The creature's final telepathic message echoed through my memory like a cosmic warning. We'd been permitted to survive as witnesses, carrying knowledge that humanity needed to understand before pushing further into territories guarded by intelligences that predated our civilization. The choice belonged to our species now, whether to heed the warning or continue expansion that would eventually provoke responses that could end human exploration of the deep ocean forever. Pacific winds howled against the research station's reinforced windows as darkness settled over the coastal cliffs. I continued my solitary vigil, monitoring feeds from stations that remained operational while searching for patterns that might explain the accelerating activity in the deepest trenches. The knowledge I carried felt heavier than the millions of tons of water that had surrounded our submarine during that terrible encounter 2 years ago.